Take for a moment a simple wooden bucket. It's an ordinary object, something you'd find at any well in any town. Now imagine that same bucket sparking a conflict so fierce that it leaves 2,000 men deceased on a single afternoon. This is a piece of historical absurdity too ridiculous to be true. And yet, if you travel to the city of Modena in northern Italy today, you can see it. A humble 700-year-old oaken bucket kept safe as a priceless war trophy. The story of the War of the Bucket is one of the most bizarre in medieval history, but the truth behind it is far more complex and compelling than the legend suggests. To understand why Bologna and Modena came to blows in 1325, we have to look past the bucket and into the heart of a conflict. The Italian peninsula had been tearing itself apart for generations. This was the age of the Guelphs and the Ghibellines. These two factions represented the great power struggle of the era. The Guelphs supported the spiritual and temporal authority of the Pope, while the Ghibellines backed the claim of the German Holy Roman Emperor. Cities chose sides, often based on little more than opposing their nearest rival. This grand ideological struggle provided a framework, a set of alliances, and a divine justification for what were often deeply personal and local feuds over land, trade, and above all, pride. In the region of Emilia-Romagna, the battle lines were clearly drawn. Bologna, a powerful and prosperous city, was staunchly Guelph, a key ally of the papacy. Its nearby rival, Modena, was just as fiercely Ghibelline, looking to the emperor for support. For decades, their shared border was a landscape of simmering hostility. The popular myth, immortalized centuries later, claims that Modenese soldiers snuck into Bologna one night and made off with the bucket from a public well. This was an act of petty theft that supposedly drove the humiliated Bolognese to declare war. The reality, however, was far less comical and much more strategic. The year 1325 had already seen a series of escalating provocations. In the months leading up to the conflict, Bolognese forces had repeatedly raided Modenese territory, burning fields and looting farms. The Bolognese had far superior numbers, but the Modenese had an ace in their sleeve, but one that wasn't entirely under their control. This trump card could only be activated in case of a full-blown conflict, not for simple raids and looting. Tensions were at a breaking point, but the final straw wasn't a stolen pail. In late September, the strategic Bolognese border fortress of Monteveglio was betrayed and captured by Modena. It was this act, not the theft of a bucket, that was the true casus belli. Humiliated and enraged, Bologna mustered its forces and declared war to reclaim its property and its honor. On November 15th, 1325, the two armies met near the town of Zappolino for what would be the only clash of the conflict. On paper, it was a laughable mismatch. Bologna had assembled a colossal army of over 32,000 men, a massive force composed of its own militia and Guelph allies. They were confident, holding the high ground, and possessing an overwhelming numerical advantage. Facing them was a comparatively tiny Modenese army of just 7,000 soldiers. Remember that the Modenese had an ace in the hole, and what they lacked in numbers, they made up for in quality, and it wasn't even close. Their force was a disciplined mix of local troops and professional German soldiers, a direct benefit of their Ghibelline allegiance to the emperor. More importantly, they were led by a brilliant commander, Passerino Bonacolsi, who understood that his only chance lay in strategy, not brute force. While the Bolognese were still getting organized, Bonacolsi launched a swift, decisive attack. The result was a shockingly swift and brutal rout. Within just a couple of hours, the massive Bolognese army broke and fled in chaos. By nightfall, the battle was over, leaving an estimated 2,000 dead, the vast majority of them from the larger Bolognese force. The victorious Modenese chased their defeated rivals all the way back to the walls of Bologna itself. But a full-blown siege of such a well-defended city was beyond their means. Instead, they opted for a campaign of pure psychological warfare. They destroyed several outlying Bolognese castles, but then it got worse. In an act of supreme mockery, just outside the city gates, they staged an athletic tournament for the soldiers, dedicating it to the eternal shame of Bologna. It was only after this theater of humiliation was complete that the final legendary act took place. As a parting shot, Modenese soldiers grabbed an oaken bucket from a well outside the city's San Felice gate. It was a worthless object, but its symbolic power was immense. It was a trophy that declared, "We've beaten you into the ground so thoroughly, we can just waltz outside your gate and take whatever we please." In the aftermath, a peace treaty was signed in January 1326. In a move that may seem bizarre today, the terms largely restored the pre-war situation. Modena returned the captured castle of Monteveglio and other territories to Bologna in exchange for a hefty ransom. Modena kept its trophy, and it has never been returned. For nearly 300 years, the Battle of Zappolino was remembered as a great Ghibelline victory, but the story of the bucket remained a local anecdote. It was a 17th century poet, Alessandro Tassoni, who transformed the bucket from a trophy into the cause of the war. He satirized the petty feuds of Italian city-states by elevating the bucket to the central cause of the conflict. The poem was so popular that its fictional premise gradually overwrote actual history in the public imagination. Today, the original bucket is kept in Modena's City Hall, so be sure to add that one to your bucket list. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy, just taking a second to remind you to hit the notification bell and turn on all notifications for my channel. Also, don't forget that you can support my channel for as little as $1 a month through the YouTube membership or the Patreon. On October 18th, 1925, along the tense border separating Greece and Bulgaria, a lone Greek soldier stood watch at the Demir Kapia Pass. In a moment that would almost ignite a powder keg, his dog bolted, darting across the frontier into Bulgarian territory. The soldier, acting on instinct, gave chase. A single shot rang out, and he was cut down by a Bulgarian sentry. In the ensuing chaos, a Greek captain who advanced under a white flag to appeal for calm was gunned down, transforming a small border skirmish into a grave international incident. This is the simple, almost absurd story that gave the ensuing conflict its famous name, the War of the Stray Dog. But like many tales from the Balkans, the truth is far more complex. The Greek government, led by a new dictator, promoted a starkly different version. In their version, this was an act of unprovoked Bulgarian aggression, where enemy soldiers crossed into Greece. The Greco-Bulgarian frontier of 1925 was less a border and more a festering wound. The two nations, once allies against the Ottoman Empire, had become bitter rivals during the Second Balkan War over the spoils of victory. They were particularly at odds over the ethnically mixed regions of Macedonia and Western Thrace. The animosity only deepened after World War I. Bulgaria, having sided with the losing Central Powers, was forced to cede Western Thrace to Greece, severing its direct access to the Aegean Sea. This loss, combined with forced population exchanges, fueled a powerful sense of grievance and a desire for revenge. The border was a zone of constant, low-level skirmishes, characterized by raids and attacks. The decision to escalate this border incident into a full-scale invasion rested with one man, General Theodoros Pangalos, Greece's new military dictator. An impulsive and authoritarian leader, Pangalos needed to project an image of absolute strength to consolidate his fragile rule. Still smarting from Greece's devastating defeat in the Greco-Turkish War, he saw a swift, decisive victory against a weaker neighbor as the perfect tool to rally nationalist support. He issued Bulgaria a deliberately provocative 48-hour ultimatum: punish the guilty, issue a formal apology, and pay 2 million French francs in compensation. When Bulgaria predictably refused, Pangalos ordered his troops across the border on October 22nd with the objective of seizing the Bulgarian border town of Petric as compensation. Bulgaria's response was one of strategic restraint. Its army, severely limited by post-war restrictions, was ordered to offer only minimal resistance, and instead place its faith in international diplomacy. Take your bets on how that's going to go right now, and let me know in the comments if it turned out like you thought it would. Facing invasion, Bulgaria appealed to the League of Nations. The young international organization responded with remarkable speed. It called an emergency session in Paris and sent urgent telegrams demanding an immediate ceasefire. This message arrived just hours before the Greeks were about to let loose the dogs of war on Bulgaria. The League backed its words with action, dispatching military attachés from Britain, France, and Italy to oversee a Greek withdrawal. An impartial commission investigated and delivered a clear verdict. Greece was the aggressor and was ordered to pay compensation to Bulgaria. On the surface, it was a textbook success for the League, a demonstration of how international arbitration could prevent conflict. However, this success concealed a fatal paradox that would doom the League of Nations. The Greeks were furious, accusing the League of blatant hypocrisy. They pointed to the Corfu incident of 1923, when Italy had bombarded and occupied the Greek island of Corfu after an Italian general was slain on Greek soil. In that case, the aggressor was a major power, and faced with Italy's threats to quit the League, the international body buckled. In that case, they ended up forcing Greece, the non-aggressor, to pay an indemnity to Italy. The contrast was stark. When a small nation like Greece was the aggressor, the League was decisive and punitive. But when a great power like Italy was the aggressor, the League was powerless to do anything. It revealed that the League's authority was not based on principle, but on power politics, a weakness that would prove catastrophic in the decade to come. In the misty Puget Sound of August 1859, two titans stood at the precipice of war. On the southern shore of San Juan Island, 461 American soldiers frantically dug in, hauling 8 massive 32-pounder naval guns up a ridge to fortify their new earthen fortifications. Out in the bay, 5 British Royal Navy warships answered, carrying a combined force of over 2,000 men and more than 70 cannons. This was the culmination of weeks of escalating tension, a powder keg waiting for a spark. The United States and Great Britain, two of the world's preeminent powers, seemed ready to shed blood over a rugged island on the far-flung edge of the continent. The cause of this extraordinary military standoff, which threatened to ignite a third Anglo-American war, was unusually delicious. It was a pig, a single large black porker, cut down in the prime of its life for rooting around in a potato patch. The crisis on San Juan Island had its roots decades earlier in the so-called Oregon Question. For years, the United States and Britain both laid claim to the vast Pacific Northwest territory, stretching from the Rockies to the Pacific Ocean. After Spain and Russia relinquished their claims, the two nations agreed to a joint occupation, a temporary solution that satisfied neither. By the 1840s, American expansionist fever, fueled by the doctrine of manifest destiny, was at its peak. The popular slogan, 5440 or fight, reflected a die-hard demand for the entire territory up to the border of Russian Alaska, pressuring President James Polk to act decisively. A compromise was finally reached with the Oregon Treaty, signed on June 15, 1846. The agreement established the 49th parallel as the main international boundary, a seemingly clean solution. But the treaty contained a fatal flaw. When the border reached the coast, the text specified it should continue to the middle of the channel, which separates the continent from Vancouver's island. The drafters apparently failed to consult a detailed map, as there isn't one channel, but an entire archipelago, the San Juan Islands, creating several. The Americans immediately claimed the boundary was the westernmost Haro Strait, which would give them the islands. The British insisted it was the easternmost Rosario Strait, which would secure the strategic archipelago for the Crown. This diplomatic situation left the San Juans in a state of legal limbo, a powder keg waiting for a match. Both nations understood that possession was 9/10 of the law. To strengthen its claim, Britain's powerful Hudson's Bay Company established the sprawling Bellevue Sheep Farm on San Juan Island in 1853. The Americans countered by encouraging their own citizens, many of them failed prospectors from the Fraser River Gold Rush, to settle on the island under the Donation Land Claim Act. This created a tense environment of rival communities living on contested ground. The British knew that controlling the islands meant controlling the main naval approach to their burgeoning colonies on Vancouver Island and in British Columbia. For the Americans, possessing the islands was crucial for securing the strategic waterways of Puget Sound and projecting national power in the West. The incident that started it all occurred on June 15, 1859. An American farmer named Lyman Cutler, fed up with his potatoes being eaten, shot a pig rooting around his property. The pig was owned by an Irishman named Charles Griffin, an employee of the Hudson Bay Company. Cutler offered $10 in compensation, but Griffin demanded an outrageous $100, far more than the precious porker could have ever been worth at market. When British authorities threatened to arrest Cutler, the American settlers petitioned a local military commander for protection, and they heeded that call. By mid-August, the situation had escalated dramatically, and the American force grew to 461 men with 14 cannons. Facing them were 5 British warships with overwhelming firepower. The tension was palpable as the British conducted live fire drills, slamming cannonballs into the bluffs near the American camp. In October 1859, General Winfield Scott arrived in the region. Nearly immobile from gout and old age, he conducted the delicate international negotiations entirely by mail from his ship, never once setting foot on the island. He and the British colonial governor quickly reached a sensible agreement. Both nations would withdraw their reinforcements and maintain a joint military occupation, with a token force of no more than 100 men each. This would be the situation until the boundary dispute could be formally settled. As any student of American history knows, the Republic was about to hit a rough patch, and San Juan Island wouldn't take precedence for some time. For the next 12 years, San Juan Island was home to 2 garrisons. The Americans established the American camp on the south end of the island, while the British Royal Marines set up the British camp on the northwest coast. Far from being a tense standoff, the occupation became a model of peaceful coexistence. The soldiers and Marines visited each other's camps, celebrated their respective national holidays together, and held friendly athletic competitions. I assume they even occasionally got together to just chew the fat, so to speak. While a few men died from accidents or illness over the years, not another hostile shot was ever fired, and the island's farm animals remained secured. By 1871, the British and the Americans looked to the newly unified German Empire and Kaiser Wilhelm I to resolve the issue. The Germans were eager to participate, seeing it as a matter of national prestige that their newly unified empire was being turned to for binding arbitration. On October 21st, 1872, after a German commission reviewed the historical maps and arguments, the Kaiser ruled decisively in favor of the United States. Notably, the Kaiser didn't make a ruling on the value of the pig itself, which seems like an oversight to me. On November 25th, 1872, the Royal Marines peacefully withdrew from the British camp, and the conflict officially ended with a single pig being the only casualty.